Chapter 9. Teaching Guitar Lessons. After entering Brookdale Community College in Lincroft, New Jersey in the fall of 1972, I landed a job shoveling dump truckloads of recycled U.S. government ballpoint casings into a grinder. When they were ground up a few minutes later, I would shovel the stuff into another machine. The result was a batch of styrofoam packing peanuts, which I then shoveled into boxes. A state-of-the-art version of shoveling shit in a rundown factory with broken windows and no heat. When it rained, water drained in like a river. It humbled me and changed my concept of time. Worked for what felt like 2 hours, looked at the clock, and saw it was really only 15 minutes. It was an important 15 minutes because I knew punching a time clock and doing unskilled manual labor was not for me. When I got home, my mom said, "There's my little working boy." That scared me. How do people do this type of thing day in and day out for most of their lives? Please, 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 anything but shoveling shit in some living hell. Immediately, I headed for the Yellow Pages and searched under M, music stores. A call to Leneve Music in Matawan, New Jersey that night put things in motion. The store was named after the two owners, Lynn and Eve. During my interview that same evening, I told Eve, a very nice older lady, that I'd been teaching for at least 4 years. She hired me on the spot. The truth was I had never taught lesson 1. The next day I quit the crap job, but it still wasn't fast enough. My bursting on the scene in this music store happened not too long after business partner Lenny had been killed in a car accident. Cramped little studio he taught in still had his name, Mr. Baird, taped to the door on an index card written in magic marker. As it was, the folks there didn't have the heart to take his name down from the door. That was perfectly understandable. It was his before I arrived, and it would be his long after I was gone. For my first day on the job, a little girl named Nancy showed up, my first ever paid student. Instantly, I became a guitar teaching guy. Time to belly up to a whole new bar. Read music, played music, and now it was time to teach music. As with most teachers of any craft, I taught the same way my teachers taught me. Basic music theory on the guitar became my approach on day 1 and for years far beyond. It worked. Soon there were more students and 3 days a week of teaching at Leneve Music. In June of 1973, I packed my van with my guitars and record albums and headed south toward Atlanta to take a shot at making a life for myself. Not a visitor this time. Leaving the band I had formed with my new friends made it tougher, but this time was forever and I knew it. I had already been away from home for 5 years from age 14 to 18 under strict supervision, but now there was no one there to direct me. It was disconcerting. My old prep school roommate, Greg Miller, flew to New Jersey to meet me and take the trip with me. That helped me actually do it more than the much younger than me knew at the time. Sometimes bravado needs company. I took a deep breath, stepped on the gas, and drove south on the New Jersey Turnpike. The Garden State was now in my rearview mirror. I was finally on my way, but really only venturing out on a tip from a friend in Atlanta. Another school buddy had made a few phone calls looking for any possible music-oriented job opportunities for me. A gentleman named Sidney Askew was referred to me as a contact. This man owned and operated the Buckhead Music Studio in North Atlanta. After Sidney and I talked several times on the phone, I made the decision to go to Atlanta and take a shot at this potential opportunity. While heading south, Greg and I had tickets for a huge show with the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers Band at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. It was a 2-day show with the Dead playing all day on Saturday with the Allman Brothers closing. Both bands were to exchange performance times on Sunday. We pulled into D.C. on Friday afternoon with plans to spend the whole day at the show Saturday. This would be an adventure in itself. After grabbing some dinner, Greg and I knew that we would have to find a place to spend the night. Upon claiming a parking place at the Washington Monument, the weather was nice, so we took a walk around the area. Peering through the fence of the White House, we wondered what President Richard Nixon might be up to. In looking back, it seems that Tricky Dick was just unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, preparing for the downward spiral that would eventually lead to his resignation. This was just a few days before the Watergate scandal blew wide open. Later on, we got in the line to go to the top of the Washington Monument. The security guard cut the line off right when we got there. They weren't going to let these two teenage hippies darken the door of Georgia's Cloud 9. While my new life was just beginning, I was scared to death. To make matters worse, a case of cold feet was beginning to set in. As Greg and I sat on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial after dark looking out over the Washington Mall, my fear of the unknown was growing. In thinking back, had my friend Greg not been with me and having to get back to Atlanta, I may have eventually chickened out and headed back to Jersey. A phone call earlier to my dad didn't help. He was behind me all the way for whatever it was I was searching for. At the same time, he also let me know there was a safety net for me back home if I needed it. A choice would have to be made, and soon. It had now been a long day, so we headed back to the van in search of sleep. A knock on the van window and a voice calling my name about 2 a.m. woke me up. It was my two friends and bandmates, brothers Bruce and Glenn, from Jersey. They had come down for the show too. We sat up and talked for a while, but we soon retired for the rest of the night. Since this was my first night leaving home on my own, it seemed only appropriate to make it memorable. I grabbed my sleeping bag, rolled out a ground cloth, and slept on the ground in front of the Washington Monument. If nothing else, this would cement the memory for me for years to come of the first night out. There were many other hippie types in town for the Almonds and Dead shows doing the same thing. Sleeping came easy that night, only for everyone to be awakened at 6 a.m. by the National Park Rangers' obnoxious megaphones rousting all of us vagrants off of George's lawn. The day of the show started early. Getting to RFK Stadium to find parking ASAP would be a priority. Since there was no way to venture out to rustle up some grub, luckily we had food with us. Folks were cranking up the music on their car stereo 8-track players. At 7 a.m. on Saturday morning, the party was starting. Our spot was by a retention pond, which gave us the feeling of being next to a lake. That made it even more fun. The concert started at noon with Doug's Psalm opening. When the Grateful Dead came on, it was 6 hours of music on a beautiful, lazy, hazy, crazy June afternoon. The Allman Brothers Band came on at dusk, being the first one to use lights. This was the first time I had seen them since high school. Their fifth album, Brothers and Sisters, had just been released. The songs Jessica, Wasted Words, Southbound, and Ramblin' Man were all new material to us. This show would serve as my inspiration to continue my journey. It would literally give me my second wind to not turn back. It was a well-needed and timely shot in the arm. Dickey Betts and Jerry Garcia would round out the show jamming together under the lights at about 11 p.m. that night. Trying to embed that last glance in my mind permanently, that memory would stay with me as I ventured south into the Virginia darkness. That visual is still clear today. There would be another stop on the way to Atlanta in Nashville, Tennessee. All I knew about Nashville was Hee Haw, the comedy music show featuring guitarist Roy Clark and country icon Buck Owens. My grandma was an avid fan of that show. The show Hee Haw would also play a major role in my career indirectly many years later. My buddy, Greg Miller, was bankrolling a demo recording session for some college friends that had a 3-piece acoustic vocal group. The ensemble consisted of 2 guys with guitars along with a female vocalist. They were really good. At age 19, even with my 10 years of guitar experience, Nashville showed me how wet behind the ears I really was. The session was in the legendary Pete Drake Studios, a place where many early country legends made their musical mark. The equipment was state-of-the-art in 1973, and it sure was very intimidating and complicated to my young frame. While sitting in the control room observing the recording process, I could hear what they were doing while having no earthly idea what I was looking at. When recording in Nashville years later, along with performing regularly at the Bluebird Cafe, only then would I realize what a brush with greatness that was. The regretful part was being too young to know any better. In June of 1973, Atlanta became home. Sidney Askew and I had our first meeting. He allowed me to move into a room in the studio on the second floor of an old office building in the Buckhead section of North Atlanta. Instead of 4 years of maid experience, I now had 6 months of really teaching at Leneve in Jersey and 10 years of practical playing experience. Of course, the stop in Nashville drove home the point in real time that there would be much more to learn. Sidney and I named the business venture the Atlantis Music Studio, which placed it in the A section of the Yellow Pages. Building the business was slow and tedious. Some nights, I just looked out the window of my combination studio living quarters and asked the question most of us ask at some point in our lives, what the hell am I doing here? It was over a month before student number 1 ever signed up. A week or 2 later, a call came in for student number 2, then number 3. It started slow and then got slower. Students sometimes decided there was more to life than drinking from my fountain of knowledge of love of guitar and all things music. They came, they saw, they stopped. The excuses. A firm policy would soon have to be established. Payment in advance became as important to me as good guitar strings. Luckily, as 1 or 2 students left, more arrived. Turnover was the drumbeat of guitar lessons. Yet enough stuck around and positive word spread about the Atlantis Music Studio. Sidney and I worked together for about a year before he lost interest in teaching and changed his life direction. The phone company called and helped me realize that. After explaining to the nice gentleman from Ma Bell of the situation of not having seen my partner around for a few days, the writing on the wall was evident that a quick change would have to be made. I was a year into teaching full-time, making an okay living through giving guitar lessons. Since the phone was my lifeline, it would be necessary to open a new account under a new name. The phone company guy stated that the Atlantis Music Studio account was now delinquent, He asked me what name I would like to open the new account under. In having to make a split-second decision thinking on my feet, I told him to open it under the name of the Roger Wilson Guitar Studio. As he repeated that to me, the words seemed to roll out in slow motion. Who in the world would ever take me seriously? The next day, I walked around the corner to the phone company and put down the $50 deposit, a major investment at the time, on the new phone service. The 4 decades-plus legacy of the Roger Wilson Guitar Studio began. 6 months in, a nice clean-cut school kid showed up for his lesson and changed me from a guy teaching the way I was taught to the man teaching others how to play from their soul. He had an electric guitar in one hand and a record album in the other. The name of the record escapes me, but it may have been Led Zeppelin 4. Part of me needs it to be Led Zeppelin 4. Yes, it was definitely Led Zeppelin 4. He wanted me to teach him something on this record. He had no basic knowledge of guitar technique, but wanted, in his own words, something he could have fun with. I put the album on the turntable and tuned up to one of the songs to get oriented. Just a few notes. Notes that changed us both that day. He excitedly proclaimed, "Yeah, show me that, show me that." So I did. He attempted several notes of the signature lead line of the song for over 30 minutes. His excitement was fun to watch, and it flowed well beyond the session. He declared he would master the riff before his next lesson. The look in his eyes sparked things in my soul. He glowed with excitement about music, real music. He woke me up that day. He helped me be more me. That me loved music way beyond the mechanics. Soon, I touched the mechanics along with the love and passion for feeling what you play and playing what you feel. From that day on, everything changed for the better. My phone didn't stop ringing for 10 years. Word spread and students came. High school students from all across North Atlanta carpooled in their parents' cars for weekly guitar lessons. They had their guitars or rock albums with them. Each kid took his lesson with me one at a time, each learned a song from a different record. As time went on, my reputation around Atlanta grew. Now I was the cool guy that would teach anyone what they wanted to learn on the guitar. It was now time to give the Mel Bay Book 1 a break. No longer would it be necessary to make my entire clientele of guitar students suffer through Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Maybe some would still have to start from scratch. Many should, but not all. At least now there was a way to make guitar lessons fun. For the next number of years, my method of learning songs on the fly for anyone and everyone evolved. I developed my ear training to a level that for me was unimaginable. My fledgling career enabled me to teach during the day and then frequent the big clubs at night. Music was much more than what I taught, it was what I lived. There were living legends all around, and I wanted to meet them, to learn from them, and to jam with them. June of 2013 marked the 40th anniversary of the Roger Wilson Guitar Studio of Atlanta, Georgia. The first location was in a private office at 220 Farr Road in the Buckhead neighborhood of North Atlanta from 1973 to 1980. The second location was a storefront at 2796 Piedmont Road from 1980 until 1985. The business operated at those brick-and-mortar locations during that period, but the operation is still in existence today in Kennesaw, Georgia, mostly in an online capacity at www.RogerWilsonGuitarStudio.com. It has been a wild ride. Part of that wild ride, or should I say one horrible adventure, occurred during the winter of 1982 at the Piedmont Road location. It was a cold winter day in Atlanta when the blizzard of '82 hit the South. This city usually gets at least 2 major snow blasts per year. This day would be one of them. It was going to be a slow day in my guitar studio, with many students having canceled their lessons due to the bad weather. My guitar lesson operation was in an old storefront building on Piedmont Road in North Atlanta. While sitting at my desk in the late afternoon, I heard a strange popping sound coming from the back part of the room, similar to popcorn popping, but louder. It stopped briefly, but started again with one final large pop. At that moment, the main fire sprinkler pipe in the rear of the store suddenly burst from the freezing temperature, blasting a high-pressure fire hydrant-style stream of water from the back directly over the length of the store straight into the front plate glass window. Somehow, the glass was holding up under the pressure, but it was wavering dangerously from an already existing hairline crack. It seemed like that it would shatter any second, and it could have been deadly if it had. Water was going everywhere. It was surreal. The pressure from the water was so intense that it wasn't raining down into the room per se, but it was flooding the floor and running out the front door onto Piedmont Road after bouncing off the barely hanging on large, potentially deadly glass pane. The wonderful lady from the business next door ran in and started helping me grab guitars off the racks to relocate them into her photography studio. We were grabbing everything from books and accessories to keep them from being destroyed. We succeeded in saving the merchandise, but it wasn't known how to turn off the Niagara Falls-type stream of water that was still continuing to blast forth. To make matters worse, all of this was taking place during the 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. rush hour. Atlanta's traffic is bad enough without major weather events making it worse. My situation wasn't helping matters for the commuters passing by outside at all. There was so much water pouring out of my studio that it was rushing south downhill on Piedmont Road and flooding below at the railroad bridge a quarter-mile away. The freezing temperatures, along with the freezing rain and my abundant H2O contribution, were turning the area around and under the bridge into an ice skating rink. That in itself was turning Atlanta's rush hour traffic at the bridge and in front of my studio on Piedmont Road into a demolition derby. Eventually, there were so many accidents from everybody sliding into each other, the road was impassable. Lucky for me, the rain disguised my complimentary tsunami, thankfully making it impossible to tell that I was the one causing most of the traffic nightmares. Had it just been a dry freezing cold that day, minus the rain or snow, the obvious ice water rapids leading from my business down to the massive paint exchange at the bridge would have taken me from cold to legal hot water, I'm sure. Even after over 40 years later, TV stations flocked to that same location under that railroad bridge after a heavy storm to film the rush hour carnage taking place. To quote the legendary Paul Harvey, "Now you know the rest of the story."